Hi and welcome to another Alpha Challenge video. In this video I will be providing you with 5 of the best decks to climb the ladder, the Hearthstone ladder. The first deck that we're going to be looking at is Death Knight. The goal of Death Knight is to be able to create the Infestors and then be able to get a really strong board coming from it. The version that I'm playing this time is the Frost Death Knight version, which does have the highest win rate on the different tracking sites, but also it has extremely high combo tones, which you'll be able to see in this future gameplay. The Death Growl plus the Horn of Winter allows you to be able to access your Infestor turn a lot earlier. So going into the gameplay footage, you'll see that I have a 1-1. I played the Zerglings down. I did also just draw into my Infestor as well. And with the Chilling Yodler and the Death Growl, it means that I'm sitting on quite a strong turn. What I do need to consider when I am doing this play is I need to make sure that I'm keeping my Infestor alive and have a buff go for it first before doing anything else, just simply because if they use a Hex, it will put me into a lot of trouble. I end up getting a Horn of Winter through my Frost Strike, which is really strong because obviously, as I mentioned just before, the Horn of Winter is one of your winning cards. I do obviously have the Infestor on my board too. So I'm just going to, this turn, just do another turn to chill. So I'm just going to play down my 3-2, and then I'm just going to trade into their minion, into their starship piece. Next turn I'll be able to use Infestor plus Horn of Winter and then the Chilling Yodler. This will mean that I'll at least get 2 of the activators on, no matter what they end up doing, if they end up using some sort of way to deal with me. Obviously with Death Growl, it means that you could spread wide as well, so that's a combo that you can use if you're using Spawning Pool. So I end up obviously just drawing the card. I draw a Frost Strike, so the next, the 3-1 will always be getting a Horn of Winter too, so it's something that I need to consider in terms of my play. So I play down the Infestor, just a moment. Yeah, so Infestor's going to be obviously my play, and we're just deciding what my best option is going to be afterwards. So I do play down the Infestor. I then use the Horn of Winter, and then I play down the Yodler, so obviously it makes sure that I've accessed my mana the best I can. I then trade the 3-4 into the 3-1 into their 3-4, and an option that I could do here is I could put the Death Growl to put onto the Yodler as well. Obviously this means that I'm sitting relatively strong, but I end up using the Frost Strike just simply because it's not likely they'll end up being able to deal with it, and I also do want to get the most value I can from the Death Growl. So it's important that you do consider your options. Like if they do use Hex, which they're about to, it obviously means that they do get the Infested sort of takeout from it, so it would have been better in hindsight using Death Growl to get it onto the 2, but ultimately I obviously didn't have the clear view of it, and there still is obviously some game that needs to be involved with it too, so you don't want to go too ham, because like I wasn't sitting on an extremely strong hand as well. So what I need to be considering now is I need to be making sure that I am getting my Zergs out as quick and best as I can. I'm also wanting to make sure that I'm trying to deal with the opponent's minions as best I can as well. So with the Viper coming into my hand, that's obviously quite a good draw for me. I end up trading the 3-1 in first, just so then I could get my guy onto the board, and then I've also just put the Hive Queen down onto the board as well. This allows me to get some more Zerg minions out, and hopefully get an Infestor or something like that obviously would be good, but otherwise I do have Viper, which can be used to be able to trade quite well into them. So they end up using a lock-on, which obviously does hinder my game plan a little bit, because it is going to obviously be able to kill my my Hive Queen, which I need to make sure that I'm thinking about when I'm using this sort of game plan. They've ended up drawing another card, and they do have obviously have the 10-10 on the board, so it is quite a problem for me. What I need to do here is I need to make sure that I'm dealing with their board as best I can, and I'm obviously getting the best value I can from my different cards. So I do play down the Hydralisk, and then I use the Baneling, because in the next turn I'm going to have to use the Viper to obviously be able to clear. I do have Death Growl, so I use the Death Growl onto my Baneling to give it to the 6-4, just in case they do end up having a minion that I need to deal with. It ends up being Ceaseless Expanse, so that obviously does end up making me survive. and it means that I don't end up having an issue with them, because if I didn't have it on the 6-3 then to AoE, it would have been the game over there. So yeah, it's important that when you are considering your different options, that you're making sure that you're you're thinking about what could potentially come out. By getting rid of the Ceaseless Expanse as well, it means that I'm sitting in a lot stronger position going into the late game, because this deck, if you aren't able to get reborns on a bunch of minions, it can have a lot of trouble with Shaman being able to clear you with the Ceaseless Expanse and use the battleships. Obviously their battleship is quite decent as well to be able to clear the board while also dealing damage to me. Yeah, so I don't have a very strong hand at the moment, so I'm hoping that I do draw into some things that are such as like Nidus Worm, or into just any sort of power to be able to increase the strength of my Zergs. They end up using their Shutter Block and then a Missile Pod, so that doesn't really mean too much for me. I do also get a spawning pool here, which is quite good. It means I can get some more minions onto the board and just apply some pressure. Since they are only sitting with 3 cards in their hand, they're obviously not sitting in an extremely strong position as well, which is good for me, being able to at least stabilize somewhat. They end up using the Fairy Tale Forest. Obviously, it draws them another Battlecry minion, which is a little bit of a concern. What I need to think of is that they do have the mini Shutter Block in their hand, so using any of my like Baneling to try and AoE them obviously won't be working. With the spawning pool being active now is obviously quite good for me as well, just because it means that I can trade the Baneling in if I need to be able to clear their board. They end up trading their Shutter Block, which I honestly think is a complete incorrect play. Like, it's obviously I haven't been doing much for the last few turns, and if they had dealt the 5 damage, it would have put them into a much better position. They end up using the Dirty Rat, which does obviously get out my 3-3, and I end up just playing down the Viper. It means that I can, whatever they end up getting, it means that I can somewhat deal with them. And I do obviously have the Baneling that's here as well. So I just trade the Baneling into the 3-4. It means that it allows me to be able to clear their board. And then I'm just going to hold the Chilling Yodeler, because obviously it's going to be a lot stronger for Infestor when I do end up getting that. Or it could be important to be using onto the Rusticar, because if I end up hitting the Rusticar when they have the battleships on the board, it means I'll be able to take control of all of them. And the other thing that is a bit of an issue with their sort of game plan when they use the Shutter Block not to attack phase is that they would be in a winning position at this point in time, just simply because of the amount of damage that they've dealt. They end up using a Dirty Rat, which does get my 3-4 out of my hand, so it means that I don't have any more minions on the board. But because of how they've played the board down, I do still have the Baneling that's here. I do draw into Nidus Worm, which is quite good, and I'm hoping for the Carrigan, but unfortunately I don't end up drawing it. So I do just play down the next Nidus Worm. I do get the Carrigan, which would have been obviously a lot better in the previous draw. And then I just play my Spawning Pool and my Baneling down. I trade the 3-2 so it's able to clear most of the board, and then I end up just trading my 3-4 into the 5-2, and then I just go face. I do use my hero power, and then I use the Zerglings as well to establish some more pressure towards them. Obviously, with them only having the 1 card in their, the 2 cards in their hand, it means that they're not sitting on an extremely strong position. I do know that there's the Gem Rainer in their hand, so that's something I need to make sure that I'm considering about when they do eventually end up playing it. But with the Carrigan and also the Spawning Pool that I do have access to, it means I'm sitting relatively strong. They use Bob the Bartender, which is going to be able to freeze my board. Yeah, and then they play down the Defense Crystal. I end up drawing the Infestor finally, which is going to be quite good for me. I do obviously still have the Carrigan as well. So I play down the Carrigan because obviously it deals quite a lot of damage to their board. And then it means I get a little bit more health back as well. In general, it's more than likely this is going to clear most of their minions because they only have 3 damage on the board and I'm dealing 8 damage. I do get a little bit unlucky for the Defense Crystal not to be hit as well, but since they've only got the 1 card in their hand and I am assuming it's Gem Rainer, I'm sitting in a relatively decent position because they will be able to clear most of this board, but with the Infestor and also the Spawning Pool and Baneling, I should be able to deal quite a decent be able to deal with them quite decently going into the next turn with their battleships. are battle cruisers. So they end up playing down the Gym Rainer here. Obviously it gets them the battle cruisers out that they've summoned, so they get the 10-10 again, which is able to clear my board. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for me, one of the 5/5s does hit one of my Hive Queens. I did also want the other 5/5 to hit the other queen as well, but unfortunately I ended up just going face, which I guess is, just fine. It's just is the way what it is. With the spawning pool that I do have access to, and the Yodeler and all those sorts of cards, I am able to use my Rush to be able to deal quite strong into them. I do play down the Infestor and then the Baneling, and then I play down my Zergling as well. This obviously is going to be quite strong for me. I then use Death Growl to be able to apply some pressure to them. Obviously it also gets the extra buff down too. And then using the Viper that I ended up getting too will be able to clear their board completely, simply because I'll be able to use the 3/3 to go twice into their minions if I need to. It does hit the Incendious, so it means that I'll be able to use all my minions to trade into them. And then I end up using the Infestor to trade into the 12-10, which means that I can then use my Baneling to trade if I need to. Obviously, it doesn't really matter too much, but I do trade the Zergling in as well, just because that's going to be the best way that I'll be able to trade to make sure that it does occur. In hindsight, that's probably still the better of the plays that I'd be doing. Like, it's not much difference, really. I could have done the Zerglings and kept the Infestor as the buff, but it doesn't really matter too much. So, yeah. The next deck that is another personal favourite of mine that would be able to climb quite easily to Legend is Shaman. Obviously with the nerfs to Fizzle, it does make it a little bit weaker, but I feel like either just the normal Terran Shaman or the defensive Shaman with the Triangulate plus the defense crystals is going to be one of the strongest decks in the meta. So going into the gameplay footage, it obviously is a little bit of a slower deck in comparison to other decks. I did keep the Thrall's Gift just for the Infestor turn, which obviously will mean that they won't be able to use their Infestor if they don't use it properly. We'll be able to Hex it. The Triangulate I kept just so then I could get the lift off if I need to. I do have my missile pods as well, and I use that just to clear those 1/1s just in case they do play them in the Infestor plus Horn of Winter plus Death Growl, because that would obviously be a massive lose condition in this sort of situation. I want to make sure that I'm applying a little bit of pressure onto them. I do end up using the Triangulate here. It does get me the lift off, so it means that I'm sitting in a relatively decent position going into next turn by having relatively strong cards to be able to deal with them, and obviously getting the more battleships down means it's more and more likely that I'll be able to get poisonous or extra AoEs to be able to deal with the potential massive boards that the opponent could end up getting. They end up using their hero power, and just using that, it doesn't really mean too much. I do unfortunately get 2 liftoffs. I was hoping for a starport in that sort of situation, or an SCV or something that I'd be able to play, but it is what it is for it. So going into next turn, I need to make sure that I'm considering my options for it. They do play down the Zerglings here. They play down their Infestor, and then they're also going to use the Death Growl here as well, which means that they will be able to clear my board while also being able to get the buffs going onto their minions. I end up using the Thrall's Gift here to clear the minion that's there, clear their Infestor, just because if they did end up using the Infestor to be able to get the double buff with the Chilling Yodeler, it would be a massive issue for me. Something as well that also would have been an issue, and I feel like they did make a little bit of mistake there, because they could have traded the 1/1 into the 2/1, and then the other one could have stayed alive, which would have meant they would be in a stronger position. They do end up getting another Infestor down on the board and the second Death Growl, which is really quite problematic for me, since I'm not, I currently don't really have a position to be able to clear their board completely. Like, I could have used the lock-on in that situation to be able to make it down to the 5/4, to be able to do the AoE, and it would have put it down to a 3/3, but the problem with that is that I wouldn't have been able to establish more pressure onto the opponent, but in hindsight, that probably would have been the better play, using the lock-on to go onto the Infestor, which would have put it down to have 3, and then they wouldn't have been able to get this extra buff down. They end up using their Infestor, and then they trade into my Titan, which does make them even stronger going into next turn. Obviously, I'm not sitting in the best of positions. I use the Starport just to be able to get my extra card out. I do have my Gym Rainer in my hand, which is quite strong, and I still do have the Liftoffs that are here as well. I use an extra Liftoff because obviously it allows you to get more and more set up. I use the Lock-on just to reduce down the cost of my battleship, and yeah, it means that I'm sitting in a relatively okay position. I do also need to make sure that I'm not going to overdraw. The lucky thing for me is that I do have the Banshees, which are going to be quite strong going into the game to be able to deal with potential boards that they end up having. And with the Starship that I do have here, I just use the second lock-on as well, just to reduce down the cost, and I'm not over drawing my mana. The lock-on is a lot less useful in this matchup, especially when they do have a lot of buffs going onto their minions. This obviously has 7 buffs going onto their minions, which is quite a difficult situation for me. They did get quite reasonable card draws. If that had hit the Ceaseless Expanse, I'd be in a significant problem as well. So they end up using their Frost Strike to be able to clear my minion. I'm not really too phased by that. It's not really a big issue or anything like that. Yeah, so going into next turn, I do obviously have the battleship that I'll be able to access. My Gym Rainers, I'll be able to access 2 if I need to as well. I do end up using another Liftoff to be able to see what cards I can end up getting. Yeah, it's not, in this sort of position, you are sitting in quite a difficult area. What is important here is that I'm clearing the minion that doesn't have Reborn, because if I did clear the if I do end up missing what I need to, it means that this at least will clear one of the minions, so I'll be able to survive going into the next turn. I do end up hitting my missile pod, which fortunately for me did end up clearing quite decently. And I do obviously have Rush as well to be able to deal with potential minions of theirs. With the 311 with the 1311 as well, I can use that to trade quite easily into the opponent. I did also end up getting lifesteal as well, which is quite good for me. And then I just used the next Liftoff to obviously start establishing my next battleship. My next Starship. They are currently posing 19 damage on board, which is obviously quite a problem for me. They do end up getting another Infestor as well, which, with the amount of damage they're posing, is quite significant. They use the Viper, and luckily for me, once again, they don't hit the Ceaseless Expanse, because if they did, I would be in a significantly worse situation, especially not being able to clear them. So going into this turn, I am wanting to be able to access my Ceaseless Expanse. I am wanting to be able to clear the board that's here as well, and obviously pose some threatening damage towards them too. With the Liberator, I can obviously make it so I can clear the Baneling, which means that my Ceaseless Expanse is a bit stronger. I obviously want to get the Missile Pod online as well to be able to make sure that I can clear a little bit better. With the Ceaseless Expanse, it is able to make it so I'm in a situation that's a little bit stronger. And in terms of going into the future turns, I do want to make sure that it is alive going into the future turn as well. The unfortunate thing for me as well is that I do have the Hive Queen that's sitting there. I end up using the Gym Rainer here just so that I can have a bit of a likelihood to be able to clear potential minions that are here. If I end up clearing the Reborns, it means that I'm sitting in a lot stronger position to be able to deal with them. I don't end up trading into or using the Ceaseless Expanse here just because if I did, it would just leave me in the same sort of situation. With having the lifesteal, it means that I'm at least somewhat defended, and I do have the Reborn that's coming with it as well. They end up using their 5/5, which obviously does deal a little bit of extra damage going into me. But the thing is that even though that they did that, and I obviously don't get the Reborn that goes with it, they do end up trading as well, which is good for me too. and then they do have the Zerglings, and then unfortunately for me, they end up getting another Viper down. I think that's number 4 or number 5 or something, so it is a bit of an issue for me. Something that is important though is they are only on 11 health, which is a reason why that I'm sitting relatively okay. Like, I'm not sitting in an extremely bad position. Obviously, they can deal lethal at any time at the moment, but I do need to make sure that I am considering my options and my outcomes that could potentially happen. I play down the Fizzle here just because I will potentially need access to the second Ceaseless Expanse, which is obviously going to be one of your stronger cards. I then use the Ceaseless Expanse to be able to clear most of the minions on the board. It means that they are sitting in a relatively weak position, and with the Medivacs that's in my hand, it's quite unlikely that, and them not having any Banelings, it is quite unlikely they'll be able to clear this board, so I'll be able to be defended at least going into the next turn. Even though they do obviously have the 3 minions that are here. And the next, I end up just using the extra hero power just to be able to get my minions a bit stronger, while also being able to make sure my board is completely full so they can't use another Viper onto me just yet. They end up using Chillforge Baron, so if they end up drawing into their Carrigan, it means that I will end up losing at this point in time. They end up, unfortunately for them, not being able to draw into that, so I am sitting in, a decent sort of position for it. They get another Viper, and then they obviously clear. They use the Rustica as well, so this means that they are sitting on a position where they could potentially have gotten something that was important, but I think that the Rustica didn't really matter. Like, they wouldn't have been able to hit anything that could have potentially made me lose, and then I end up just taking them out with the Ceaseless Expanse. So even though they had the massive buffs and things like that, it is still possible, obviously, to win, which does show the power of the Shaman deck. The next deck that I think is really strong for climbing the ladder is Zergling Hunter. I showed this one recently, and the power behind the deck is being able to get the Zerglings out really strong and really aggressive onto your opponent's board. With the power of Spawning Pool being able to access Rush, in addition to Reserve Spot reducing the cost while increasing their minion, the buff on the minion, it does make it really strong going against your opponent. So going into the gameplay footage, you'll see that I ended up back in Spawning Pool and also that Zergling that's there, just because it means that I can get some tempo down onto the board onto the opponent. So I play the Spawning Pool, I play my first Zergling down. Obviously next turn I'll be using the Reserve Spot to be able to get a strong boost off for the next turn. Just make sure that if you are going for this particular strategy, you don't pop the second Spawning Pool in this situation, so you don't lose the cost reduction that can come from this card. They end up using their Spawning Pool, so it obviously gets a minion onto the board for them. It gets this location on the board for them, and I'm just going face with this damage that's here. There's no point to proc my Spawning Pool just because I don't have a particular play to do this next turn, that turn, because there's no point using the rush proc for it. They end up using Domino Effect, which does clear two of my most of my minions, so I just have the 5/1 that's left, which is a little bit difficult. So I end up just playing down my Titanforge traps. Obviously, it applies a little bit of pressure towards my opponent, and ultimately just helps me with choosing what sort of strategy I'm going to go for. I end up getting the Hidden Meaning, which is quite strong, especially in the early game against specific decks. I also do have the Char in my hand as well, which will be quite strong to boost up my Zergling for next turn. And I will have Rush on it for next turn as well because of the Spawning Pool activator. So I end up having the 5/1 that's here as well. So I do obviously have the Char that's in my hand as too. So what I want to do is I want to trade the 5/1 into the into that 4/1, so it ends up getting a +6/6 boost to my Zergling. And then obviously I do activate the Spawning Pool so I can trade into their 4/6. This does create quite a strong board for me. Going into the opponent's next turn. Since they are playing the Giants list, and they don't have any Giants down the board, it does mean that I have quite a strong board to be able to deal with what they have coming towards me. They end up playing down all their Zerglings, so obviously with the bait and switch, it does make me out of range for those particular minions to be able to take me out. So they end up just trading into my guy. They use their Soul Searching, which won't particularly do too much since I do have obviously quite a decent sized board now, especially since I got the bait and switch proc. And I end up just using the Char here. It obviously gets me a bigger board for my opponent to have to deal with an extra 2/7/7s, and then I just go face with my two other minions that are here as well. There's no point playing down that 1/1 that's in my hand, just in case they do have some sort of way to deal with me, especially since I do have quite a strong hand that's here. Another powerful deck for climbing the ladder currently is Hero Power Druid. The power behind Hero Power Druid is being able to access your Protoss minions quite easily and quite quickly. Chrono Boost is an extremely powerful card to be able to access a lot of your other Protoss cards, and it means that with Chrono Boost, in addition to Construct Pylons, you're able to access your Artanis as early as turn 5, which obviously is very powerful. Being able to then also, in addition with your Groovy Cat buffs, being able to increase the hero power to be able to deal a lot of damage coming from your hand as well. So I'm just waiting, obviously, till they finish their turn doing their Discover card, but I'll be pretty much certainly be playing down the Groovy Cat this turn. I don't think there's any other card combination that I wouldn't play it down for. So they end up just passing over to me. I play down the Groovy Cat. Swipe, just while we're discussing, is very powerful as well because it allows you to clear your opponent's taunts when you can send more damage to your opponent's face as well. They end up playing down their Parrot Sanctuary and they trade into my Groovy Cat, so I possibly should have traded the Piper in that situation, but I end up just not worrying too much about it, and I put my Hero Power as costing 0. I don't use the Hero Power here because I'm going to be using it for my Artanis turn, so next turn I'll be playing Chrono Boost. It will get me a guaranteed with Construct Pylons, and then I can, on turn 5, use the Artanis in addition to the Hero Power that will go with it to take out my opponent. They end up playing down the Zerglings onto the board, so it gets them a few of their minions, and it's also getting quite close to them having the Seaside Giant turn. I do draw into my Chrono Boost here as well, so I get another Construct Pylons, and I just send all my damage to face into the opponent. It's possible that I should have just traded the 1/1 into one of their 1/1s just to make sure that they didn't have the Hydralisk going into me, or a weaker Hydralisk turn through it. But I ended up just opting to go face because that is the main idea behind the deck. And with the Hero Power costing 0, it means next turn I'm going to be able to deal 12 damage just from hand. They end up discovering another minion. They do trade into my 1/1, so it ended up being a positive situation for me in that. And then they end up playing down their Seaside Giant, so they do get the 8/8 down onto the board. They've used both of their Parrot Sanctuary activators now, so they're now just I think they may potentially have a Zergling in their hand at this point in time, what I'm thinking. But they end up just playing down the Barrel of Monkeys. So with the Barrel of Monkeys, they're able to get 2 extra taunts down onto the board. It doesn't really mean too much for me at this point in time, simply because I do have the Artanis turn this turn. So I play the Artanis down. Turn 5 is generally when you're wanting to play Artanis, just because with Construct Pylons it's very consistent, especially when you do have the Chrono Boost. I put the Divine Shield onto my 3/5 just because I don't mind them having the extra damage that's there for it, and it also means that I have a bit of a stronger board going into them as well, and I end up dealing 1 extra damage doing it that way too. They end up using a tracking here, which is perfectly fine. Like, I'm not really too concerned about that at this point in time. Obviously they can get alien encounters, which could be a little bit of a concern for me in future turns, but I do have a Chrono Boost turn that I can do. It won't end up getting any other minions from my deck though, because of the fact that I have used all my Chrono Boosts. They end up using their Parrot Sanctuary, and they're going to do some trading into my minions. Once again, I am just more than likely just trying to deal face damage to my opponent, so it is in general going to be better for me to be able to just deal face damage to them. They end up powering up their weapons and they can deal with my 3/4, and then they just send their minion into my face. I end up drawing into another Groovy Cat, which is quite strong, so it obviously gets me an extra buff. I play the Cactus Construct down first just because it may get me a Groovy Cat as well. And I end up choosing just the one that gives Rush with it, just in case I potentially draw into something as well. There wasn't really any choices that were very useful in that, and I just send all my damage towards the opponent's face, because once again the game plan is just to deal face damage to them. I also in the future turn will have Swipe plus Chrono Boost plus Hero Power, which can deal with potential taunt minions that they may have. They end up just freezing my face with their Glacial Shard, and then they're going to use the Titan to be able to trade into my minions using their and getting a taunt through it as well when they do attack. They use the bird watching as well, which is perfectly fine. It's not really too much of a concern for me. And they just trade into my 1/1 with their face, so it's not really doing too much for them. And then they're just going to deal face damage with the Seaside Giant. Obviously, it doesn't end up actually doing anything just because of the fact that it just, it doesn't do anything for it. I just play down my Bob the Bartender because they didn't really do anything last turn, and freezing the board means that I'll be able to re-establish my turn for next turn. I do have the Pixie here, so I just traded into the Divine Shield of the Annoyotron, just simply because getting rid of the Divine Shield means that if I get another swipe, I'm able to use that as well. But it means that the Divine Shield's gone. That is potentially limiting my ability next turn. I could have possibly just traded the 2/3 into the 3/3, their taunt minion that they have, but it doesn't really matter too much just because I am in such a strong position. The opponent plays down their Glacial Shard, and then they're going to send damage into my Bob the Bartender. Obviously, doing that means that they don't end up getting their extra taunt onto the board, which it's not really too much of a worry for me. Me being frozen is a little bit of a situation. I can't use any of my Draenei's here either. I do obviously have the Pixie that's quite useful for me. My hero power is getting an extra 5 damage, so I put the damage. I put the buff onto my Pixie, and then I draw the cards, because drawing the cards obviously is quite a strong play for you to do. I still am a little bit off at the moment because I could do the Chrono Boost play. Actually, I could have done the Chrono Boost play, but there's still one too many taunts in the way. So doing this means that they're left with quite a weak board. It takes control of their Sea Giant, and it means that next turn I'm set up for whatever they may potentially be bringing. Like if they do a Ceaseless Expanse, could be a potential concern, but I think there's still not been enough cards played to have to deal with it. They end up just playing down a Spawning Pool, and then they use their hero power, but with the board state that I currently have, I'm in a winning position to be able to finish them off, and they end up conceding. The last of the decks that I'm going to highlight today is Location Warlock. The strength behind the deck is being able to summon out extremely large giants as early as turn 4 or 5, while also being then able to overwhelm your opponent's board. The AoE that comes from the cavern is extremely strong as well. So turn 1 at this current point in time is obviously going to be playing Spawning Pool, and turn 2 will be the Worm, unless I draw into the cavern, which would then be playing the cavern down. I end up drawing into Ziliax, so obviously it's not very important for me there, and I just use my, I just tap the location. Right now I'm obviously deciding whether to do the Zerglings, but it's not really necessary. Since I have access to the Worm, it's more important to be able to use that and actually make use of my mana next turn, otherwise, instead of just hero powering. They end up just dealing some damage to face, because if I hadn't have drawn how I did, it would have obviously been better for me to do that. I end up getting the cavern out of my deck, so now that I've got access to one of my caverns, I also do have some healing through the Consume as well. Next turn's always going to be playing down the cavern to be able to deal with the 1/1 that's there on their board, and it more than likely will be using a Consume, but I also draw a Glacial Shard here, which can be useful as well to make sure that I trade into them. So with the Glacial Shard, it is obviously going to be the best way to deal into them. And right now I end up putting it onto the 3/3 just because of if they potentially have a backstage bouncer, it's something that could be a bit concerning for me. They could trade and then go backstage bouncer and obviously get full value from it. By having it on the Murloc, it means that they can't use the backstage bouncer to trade in very easily. Like, they would trade, but they'd lose it, so it means that they can't just trade into my minion there. That's the reason why I chose that play. I have the other cavern inside of my hand, and I also do have access to the domino effect, so right now I'm just thinking of how I'm going to limit my damage. It would have been nice to be able to play the cavern, but I didn't really want to take that much damage from my opponent, especially since I'm down to 18 health. They end up getting a playing down their delicious cheese to get a bunch of 3-drops. With the Frothing Berserker, it does make it a little bit scary. They end up also putting down their Murloc to be able to trade into me as well. They trade into my Zergling, and then the Missile Pod, I believe, also trades into the other Zergling. And then their Frothing Berserker currently is a 6/4. I draw into my worm here, so I'm just trying to decide what the best way to go about it is going to be. So using both of the caverns means that I can just trade my Zerglings into the Frothing Berserker to be able to get rid of it from the board. Then I can use the Consume to be able to get rid of the 3/1, and it also obviously heals me back up, and it leaves my opponent without anything sitting on their board. So with that, it obviously turned around the board state that they had. I don't really have too much happening in my hand right now as well. They play down their Horn of the Windlord, so it is obviously able to clear my Giant quite easily, but it means that in a future turn I'll be able to set up relatively decently. I do also draw into the Seaside Giant as well, which is quite good for me. It means I can get my Karrigan online a lot earlier. I end up hero powering first before the Seaside Giant, just in case it's not the play, even though there's not really a situation that I don't need to. And I don't use the Consume before because there's no way that my opponent... the only card that would punish that is if my opponent used Ghost, but it's not a very common card to be included inside of these decks. They end up using a Liftoff and a Starport, so it's obviously quite useful for building up their starship, but in reality, it's not going to be dealing too much with the Giant that I have on the board. So what I'm trying to get now is I'm trying to get obviously get a Giant on the board, but I'm also thinking about how I'm going to best get my other minions down too. By drawing into the 6-drop that's there, it means that I can get an extra Giant onto the board since I do only have Seaside Giant as a possibility with the other cards. And then I can use the Seaside Giant and also use the Consume to get a bunch of 8/8s down. It means that it's quite threatening to my opponent's board, especially since they didn't use Lock-On the previous turn. It makes me assume that they don't have access to another Lock-On, and then they obviously end up conceding. Even though they could have obviously survived for that turn, it would have been in a pretty bad situation with them taking all the face damage from it.